Namaste and welcome to this episode of the Festival of Bharat with me, Pujita Krishna. Joining me today is Sankrant Sanuji. Sankrant Sanuji is an author, entrepreneur, and public intellectual who is the founder and CEO of Garuda Prakashan, which is a publishing house. He spent 9 years at Microsoft Corporation in various engineering and management roles and then left the IT sector to focus on personal growth in yoga traditions and to work towards a plural and sustainable world. He's an advocate for indigenous cultures and he's written a book called The English Medium Myth Dismantling Barriers to India's Growth. Sankrantji is a graduate of IIT Kanpur and the University of Texas at Austin and holds 6 technology patents. He's a faculty member at the Art of Living Foundation. Sankrantji, welcome. So happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So nice to be here.
So I'm going to start off with a subject that is up your alley, which is, you're an advocate for indigenous cultures, and you've written extensively about, especially about the English. I mean, the book that I just mentioned is about the English medium myth. The title is very intriguing, and then you've also spoken about the English class system, right? So, could you demystify that or unpack that for us a little bit, please?
Sure. Let's talk about the first one, which is the English medium myth. And this is something that I encountered among my own peers. I myself went through English medium schooling in India and then, went abroad. And the myths are the myths that I also carried. For instance, the myth that English is necessary for progress, English is necessary for technology, English is the way that India will make progress. So all of these assumptions I had carried as well. And it was only through my international experience that I learned that most of these assumptions were actually false. And the more I dug into it, I realized that English is actually a big barrier to over 90% of the people in India. So rather than being the vehicle for our progress, it's actually what's holding us back, because there is a system of discrimination. I would even call it linguistic apartheid that doesn't really let you rise in India unless you are an English medium learner. So that's what the book is about in a nutshell.
So you're saying that, in fact, not knowing the language is not a handicap, is what you're saying, or that?
Well, my point is that all over the world, if you look at the countries that are most developed, in fact, in my book, I have a table which looks at the top 20 countries by GDP per capita. And I leave very small countries under, I believe, 5 million or something population. So, it's reasonably sized countries. And I found that every single one of the top 20 countries uses their own language for higher education,
Right.
for technology education, for management, for medicine.
Mm.
So if you look at France, look at Germany, look at Japan, look at South Korea, you go across the board, you'll see that the countries, whether in Asia or in Europe, that are developed, are all use their own languages.
Mm.
So the question is not about learning English or not. I think it's a great idea to learn English, but to assume that English is the way that a country will progress, or you cannot do medicine unless you learn English, or learn in English, that you have to learn in English medium. I mean, the Japanese would laugh at you. They have the top neurosurgeons in the world. They all study in Japanese up to the PhD level.
Right. True, I agree. I mean, also to add to what you're saying, if you look at the previous generation, if I look at even my father's generation, he grew up in what I would say rural Andhra, right? I mean, small town, and I believe that their education, Telugu medium school, so learning all the sciences, so all the terms that they knew of all the tech, the jargon or the terms, right? All the terminology was Telugu, right? And of course, he then went on to do his engineering and speaks good English and joined the Indian Air Force. So naturally, that is not. I mean, contrary to what people believe, it's not a handicap. In fact, they do seem to do far better if they're.
Right. In fact, it's the other way around. English is the handicap, which is that imposing English, and this has happened by the state, One of the other myths that is often talked about in India is that everybody actually wants to study in English medium, but the state is pushing Hindi or it's pushing regional languages. But it's in fact it's the other way around, because the state funds that all the IITs be only in English. The state funds that all the IIMs be only in English. The state funds that all medical education be only in English. In fact, you'll be very surprised. All the Ayurveda colleges in India that are funded by the state are only English medium. You cannot study Ayurveda where the core texts are in Sanskrit.
Exactly.
You cannot study Ayurveda in Indian languages in any government funded college. So it's really so the whole excuse, well, knowledge came in English, which is also of course not true. But even if you took that, scientific knowledge is in English, well, Ayurvedic knowledge is all in Sanskrit, but they're still teaching it in English medium.
Yes, which is that is quite revelatory. The fact that Ayurveda is being taught in English. How tragic is that?
So it is simply not, and the issue that they were taught this way because English, was necessary. They were taught this way as a function of state policy. Right from the British time, there was state policy to make English be on top. So today, you can practice in a low court, in a municipal court, you can practice in an Indian language. But if you go to the high courts or the Supreme Court, you can only practice in English. This was by design. Even in the armed forces,
Yes.
if you want to appear for an officer entrance,
You have to.
especially for the interview, you have to do it in English. And but if you want to apply as a Jawan, you can do it in Indian languages. So that hierarchy, that apartheid, that system of dual citizenship in a way was already set up, where the English class was privileged. This happened through the bureaucracy, all of that. So the English class was privileged. It was put on top, and everybody, had to learn English to get into that circle.
So it's like an elite charmed circle.
Exactly.
And you make it like this like this unattainable goal.
Exactly. It's not even a glass ceiling; it's a concrete ceiling, because it's very clear. It's like that.
True, very true.
Yeah. And what I found was, as I started speaking about this subject, and I went and I spoke in all of the IITs, I went and spoke in, so many institutes in India, and students would come running to me after my talk. I was speaking at IIT Roorkee, and some students came running to me and said, "Sir, मैं 1.5 साल से पढ़ रहा हूँ, आपका पहला lecture समझ आया है." So this is a person who's in IIT, who's studying in IIT for over a year, right? And he runs up to me and says that yours is the first lecture that I've understood, because they're only teaching in English medium. And another person also at IIT Roorkee talk came up and said, his dream was to appear in to go to the armed forces. He gave the NDA 6 times. Every time he would get very high marks, but he would always fail in the group discussion phase, because the group discussion was in English. And it's crazy. Like, this is a person who's like dedicated to serving the country, is willing to die for the country. And you're saying you can only die for the country in English.
Yes, very, very sad. Also, I wanted to add, there are states, for example, I don't know how it is, and also it's paradoxical. For example, Bengal, they place a high premium on Bengali, right? I mean, as such, the culture is such that there's a lot of government schools, or even so. This thing about convent education, I think, is kind of definitely in the south, English medium, but I think certain states have intrinsically somehow resisted it. Do you think that's true?
I think there are states that are better at their own languages than other states. Like, for instance, Kannada literature is very thriving. Bengali literature is quite thriving. But the problem happens when you still have that ceiling, which is that even if you did primary education in Bengali, for instance, and a lot of people, when I talk about this, they criticize the communist effort, which said, okay, we're going to do everything in Bengali. But what they don't realize is that it was not because they were trying to do it in Bengali that the problem arose. The problem was they never extended it all the way to the higher education, right? So if you say, oh, only we're going to do elementary, or we're going to do primary, or only going to do schooling in Bengali, but then again you have this big transition into higher education, and there's absolutely no reason why you cannot be a doctor in Bengali. I mean, Bengali is a huge language. There are millions and millions of people who speak Bengali, and and or, if you can do it in Japanese, which literally has a script with 2,000 characters, and the Indian languages are super scientific. In fact, there's a lot of similarity between the Latin that is used in medicine versus the Sanskrit, and so to create a vocabulary, in fact, the vocabulary also exists. People have already done that effort. So to say, somebody who's going to be from a village in Bengal, they can study in Bengali, they can become a doctor, and they can go serve their village. There's no problem at all. But because we want to create this elite system, we want to say, no, there's no entry into this club till you become anglicized. That's why we keep on imposing English
So
into
you
that.
can become a doctor learning Bengali and serve a village in Bengal, but you can't get into a corporate hospital, right? If you
No, but you cannot even study, you cannot even become a doctor studying Bengali because there is no medical education in Bengali. Right? So even what I'm saying is, even if you wanted to serve your own village and become a doctor studying in Bengali, you're going to talk to the patients in Bengali, right? But you cannot study medicine in Bengali because it doesn't exist. You have to go into the English system, and then you have to go back to the village, and then you don't even want to go back to the village because you've been
Correct.
anglicized in your
Correct.
mind.
True, true, true. Wow. Oh my God, so many things to, I mean, like I said, like, this whole movement for decolonization, I think it's
Many things to unpack, and there's one other point I'll mention here, because a lot of times when I start speaking of language, people assume I'm advocating for Hindi, but I'm not. I'm actually advocating for mother tongue education. And mother tongue education has been recognized scientifically as the best way for a child to learn. So there is no dispute in the scientific community that this is actually the scientific way, right? A lot of times when I speak about this, people say, no, you want to take us back. You want to take us, you want to make us primitive or something, which is again, all these notions that one has in our head, when the truth of the matter is every country that's actually making progress are those that are using their own language, right? So, and the Indian states, the size of them is so big that every state is equivalent to a country in Europe or
correct.
more in terms of the population.
Yes.
So there is no problem that we could use 22 languages to teach our children. There's absolutely no problem with that.
Well, I do hope that with the new, what do you think of this new, of course, not new anymore, but the current dispensation and the changes in the education policy? Do you think that there is some scope for, introducing what you just said, making at least some part of our education compulsory in a mother tongue, or making it or not making English such an elitist, yeah.
Well, the good news is that the new education policy does talk about mother tongue education, and it does talk about encouraging mother tongue education, and it does talk about having higher education in the mother tongue. So let me start with the good news, which is that now we have AICTE, which is the engineering top body, which for the first time has now allowed that engineering can be taught in Indian languages. It was not even allowed legally,
Oh my God, that's a big win.
Yeah, that's a big win. So they have allowed it, and not only that, they're actually putting some effort in terms of bringing textbooks and so on and so forth. So I had been, doing a lot of advocacy. Met the chief, I had met, really everybody that I could possibly meet in the political spectrum. So for many years, I wrote this book in 2014, and for many years it felt like I was just banging my head against the wall. Nothing was happening, nothing was moving, and it's also, a good lesson in patience. But I see over the last 3 4 years, some movement has started to happen, which is very gratifying. But the NEP does talk about it, but it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't really talk about saying, well, we must have education in the mother tongue, or it's a requirement, or it will make sure that the every institute is obligated to offer education in the mother tongue. It doesn't make any requirement. So it's too loosey goosey. It's very easy to just continue on the current system. So there is no hard and fast intervention. And when the ship has been sailing for in one direction for so long, you really need a very strong person or the very strong movement of the steering wheel, so that you can actually turn it around. Movement of the wheel. So I think that's what's missing, but at least they have started to talk about it. And they've even started to talk about it politically. Modi ji, in some speeches in Bihar, for instance, said, we're going to bring engineering in Hindi, we're going to bring medicine in Hindi. So I think those are the right steps, but much more work has to be done. Yeah.
Of course, of course. Well, that's good to know. It's very heartening to know that something is at least happening.
Very much, very much. It feels like, sometimes you're like on this like crazy advocacy thing, and you're just like saying, why aren't people understanding and why is nothing happening? And, sometimes years later said, okay, maybe my work made a little sliver of a difference, and that's worthwhile.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So there is, of course, there's a lot of effort now, what with elections, literally down the road in 2024. So there's the efforts to undermine Bharat is doubling up. So there's a lot of people, and this narrative about questioning the antiquity of India as Bharat, as a nation, has been going on for a while, right? And now we've had Rahul Gandhi in his, all his travels, saying, like a mantra that India is a union of states. It's not nation, or it's never been a nation. Basically, trying to say that this concept of one unified nation with a strong sense of selfhood didn't exist before the British created it, and you've countered it through your writings over the years, right? So, what would you say? I think it's important to keep reiterating these things.
Yeah, I think it's worth speaking about. I think about 20 years ago, I had written that one article on Sulekha, I believe, which is now on my blog, sankrant.org, which
Yes,
went really viral, and it's called "Why India is a Nation," and
I get it.
and that was specifically to address this issue, which had kept coming up over and over again. And the more I dig into it, or the more I dug into it, I was actually shocked at how misled we've been. Um, and this itself, the notion that India is not a nation, was very much a colonial input, was a colonial notion, and it was very deliberate. They very deliberately wanted to propagate that, because if they were accepting that India is a nation, then obviously much more resistance would occur across India. So they wanted to undermine that resistance of Indians getting together and saying, we've been a nation. Now, the notion of a nation itself is somewhat of a new notion. I mentioned this in my essay, because nationhood and the way we understand it now got, a lot of it got defined in European, politics over, the Treaty of Westphalia, and all of this happens, in about a 200-year interval. So I wouldn't say that we have to stick to the European idea of nation, because the European idea of nation said people of one ethnicity who speak one language,
Yes.
and so on and so forth, speak a common culture. But that kind of notion, trying to fit India into that, doesn't make any sense. That's like Europe's sort of dream sequence or fantasy about what a nation is, right? We don't have to really be concerned with that. For us, the idea is different. We ask this question: did the people who were living in this geography of Bharat, did they have some notion of continuity? Did they have some notion that connected them? Did they see themselves as sharing a common idea?
Common.
And it's really about ideas here, because all nations, one way or the other, are constructed on ideas. So if I look at the ideas, the notion of nation comes so strongly in the Indian tradition that it's almost uncanny. There's nothing like it on the planet, actually. I mean, if you look at Shankaracharya, who's doing his Digvijay Yatra, a couple of thousand years ago, or maybe even earlier, and he's a child from a village in Kerala, and he goes on the Digvijay Yatra. Firstly, why does this Digvijay Yatra circumambulate this nation of Bharat? Yes. If there is no notion of Bharat, I mean, he could easily just have gone to Tamil Nadu and Kerala and be happy. What's the need for this particular yatra? Not only does he do the yatra, he actually establishes mathas on all four corners of India.
Exactly.
It's a complete diamond shape that really says this is the territory that is of interest to me. Now, why didn't he set up mathas in Greece and somewhere else, or Southeast Asia?
Only in Kerala, for example.
Yeah, or only in Kerala. I mean, there was plenty. I mean, Kerala is pretty big to start with. You could have done a lot of matters right there, right? Yes. So he had clearly the notion of what is this territory, what is this nation that he needs to circumambulate and he needs to establish, going all the way to Kashmir, by the way, where
Yes.
Shankaracharya Hill is there,
Badrinath,
right?
all the way to
Yeah,
Badrinath.
Badrinath and Shankaracharya Hill in Srinagar.
Yes, yes, correct,
Right?
correct, correct.
And the mathas, of course, are in Badrinath in the east and the west and the south. So he does that very deliberately, right? Because he has this notion, which is of pan India, and that notion you'll find comes up over and over again for us. So only the ignoramuses who have no knowledge of the Hindu tradition and who have not vested in the Hindu tradition. Rahul Gandhi is a prime example, would go around saying things, oh, it's a union of state, never existed, blah, blah, blah. Well, if it was union of state, why is it that all of our stories, if you look at the story of Shakti, where Shakti is cut up in all these pieces,
Parts, yes,
right? Parts, and they land, guess where? All over India.
yes.
They don't land in China and they don't land somewhere else. They land all over Bharatvarsh.
True.
And not only that, they if you map them, they actually inscribe a figure of a woman all across India. So
Oh,
even the notion, yeah,
I didn't think, oh,
it's amazing. The anklets land in Sri Lanka or something.
oh, lovely. Oh my
You
God.
know, so this again, this notion of Bharat as one, as a divine mother, whose parts are all over India, right? Again, such an old notion, such an amazing notion. Same thing happens with the Mahabharata, because the Mahabharata is, we say no Bharat existed, but Mahabharat happened.
Correct,
So
correct.
if people didn't have a notion of Bharat, how can you even talk about Mahabharata?
Mahabharat,
Right?
exactly, exactly.
Exactly. And so Mahabharata takes these kings again that are, from the east to the west, you'll find from Patliputra all the way to present day Afghanistan, Gandhar, which was, of course, part of the
Yes.
the limits of India. So you find all of these kings, and the Mahabharata is actually an encyclopedia of Bharat. We are actually confused of what the Mahabharata is. There is so much knowledge in the Mahabharata, which is actually practically nothing to do with the war.
Correct.
They're talking about all of the plants that exist in all these different places. They're talking about all of the trees. They talk about all of the rivers. They talk about all the lakes. So all the animals in different parts. So this is really Encyclopedia Britannica of that time is Mahabharata.
Mahabharat.
Mahabharata is the encyclopedia, and it was designed as an encyclopedia compendium of knowledge about the different parts of India. And similarly, if you look at the story of the Ramayana, which is again is a story which is found all over India, right? There are all these versions of Ramayana that is found in all of
So
the
many.
Indian languages. All of them are celebrating it, and there is a recognition of Rama all the way from the northernmost point to the southernmost point,
Yes.
right? There's a recognition of Rama in poetry in Bengal, and there's a recognition of Rama in poetry in Maharashtra, right? So somebody again who's completely ignorant of the Hindu tradition, who's not vested in it, will say, no, 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 the India Union says no unity. But how did Rama creates this fabric of unity? You'll go to a small village somewhere in Madhya Pradesh, and they'll talk about, no, Sita came here, her steps are here, we put it here.
Janapadas also, right? Those little,
Yeah.
yeah.
All these Janapadas, and then there all these local small places have stories that are connected. Oh,
Correct.
Balaram came here, or Krishna
Yeah.
came here, or Rama came here. All of these stories, and in fact, there is a book which has gone through a lot of these stories and linked and traced Rama's exact path from the north to the south. So all these stories actually link up to that voyage. So it's really, really amazing
Which
how
book
this
is
history has
this?
been.
Which book is
This is
this?
D.K. Hari's book.
DK Hari.
D.K. Hari. D.K.
Okay.
Hari is one of our Garuda authors also. Although
Okay.
I think this book was published before he published with Garuda, but I think it's D.K. Hari's book on Rama's voyage or something like
Oh,
that.
okay, okay.
You can look at it. So all of these local places are connected, and the stories are connected. And again, without a notion of Bharat, how did all of these people come to recognize Rama in that way? And it goes over. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Even today, when we are chanting our mantras, doing our puja, we say,
Jambudvipe,
Jambu Dweep, Bharat
Bharatvarshe.
Khande. That's where we start. We
Yes,
literally start with Bharat Khande, and
correct.
again people come up and say, "Oh, there was no Bharat. The English created. The British
Exactly.
created it."
That's the, I mean, that's the basic. I mean, you can just give them this example, and it should put all
Exactly.
arguments to rest.
Exactly. So, like, we really have, we start with that in every prayer, and we talk about the five rivers, and the rivers are from north to
Not
south,
exactly.
and we talk about taking all the water of the sacred rivers. In fact, there is no country on the planet
Yeah.
that has a stronger sense of nationhood than India
Than
does.
India
You
does.
know,
And it's not,
and
it's not an
the
artificial, yes.
I mean,
And I was just saying that it's not an artificial, like a authoritarian sense of a nation as a modern
exactly,
state of
exactly.
Europe became. But here
Right.
it's so organic, right?
Exactly. It's all these threads and fibers and linkages that have linked these people together. And again, a lot of the example, I'm also writing a book on it, but my initial essay, Why India is a Nation, you can go and read on
Yes.
sankrant.org, which talk about all of these invisible threads that bind,
Hmm.
and all of these stories, all of this, and people were not confused. In fact, so many things are true. Today, we just published a book from Garuda, which is talking about how the temples in Himachal Pradesh actually have a Bengali influence. So there's this huge Bengali influence on temples in Himachal Pradesh. Similarly, we'll find so many other temples in the south where their pujari has to come from the north, and there's temple in the all of these things.
Banaras has so many priests from the priests are from Telugu land. They, a lot of
Exactly,
Telugu priests,
exactly.
yeah, for generations,
For
have been.
generations, and in fact, you'll go to a people talk about language, so it's very interesting to weave in the language question here too.
Hmm.
Shankaracharya, there's so many jivanis of Shankaracharya that have been written,
Hmm.
about Shankaracharya Digvijay Yatra. In none of them they said Shankaracharya had a language problem while traveling India.
Right.
After all, I mean, he traveled from the north to the south. He must have slept somewhere, eaten somewhere, talked to people on the road,
Absolutely.
figured out what to do. He's a boy, he's 10 years old, So, and none of them say there's a language problem in India. So the language problem is also introduced by the English. You
Exactly.
know, they first, introduce this notion that India never existed.
Hmm.
And it's very funny that the British come and teach us India never existing. And what did they name their company which started trading with India? It's
East
called
India.
East India Company. So apparently India was created after the British,
But
in
they got
the,
the name beforehand.
but they already knew it was the East India Company before they even came.
True, true. And
So
yeah, what you were saying, Sankranji, about Sankaracharya traveling around the country and not knowing the language. Just to give you an example, my great grandparents, my mother's grandparents. So this was a custom of going to Kashi, right? The pilgrimage also, people from all corners of the country. So my great grandparents who lived in Vijayawada, a small remote town or little whatever in those days, on foot, traveled all the way to not just Banaras, but also went as far as Pashupati Nagar in Nepal. Now, how is that possible with the language? Clearly, they only knew Telugu.
right,
But
right.
this is what unified the people of this land, right?
Yeah,
And
it was never, the language was never a problem in India. It
yes,
was not a barrier. We made them into a barrier. Now we've got this crazy agitations where they want to deface a sign because it's another language. The
exactly.
interesting thing is, you can go right now to a temple in Kashi and you'll find the prayer book in all of the South Indian languages today. You'll find explanation books of all in all of the languages of India today. There's
Yes,
no problem. The mandir is not ever a problem. It's
yes.
the colonial setup that has created this barrier of language and all of this, distinction.
Very true, very true. Sankranji, again, kind of in tying into what we're talking about, undermining Bharat, etc. So Rajiv Malhotra ji has done tremendous work in this field and has been doing for many, many years. And of late, he's been also, talking about breaking India forces. Breaking India was a term he kind of created, and we use it now. And so breaking India forces 2.0 is what he's talking about now, where he's talking about new players in this whole game of trying to undermine the country or discredit the country or so on and so forth. And he's talking about how there's a new kind of scholarship that's being encouraged in universities like Harvard, for example, under the garb of trying to promote Indology and so on, and basically saying that doing a lot of scholarship in Indology, but in a very subversive way, trying to undermine the country. And particularly talking about how there are Indian scholars now. They're no longer white, blue-eyed scholars, but Indian scholars who are being fostered in these universities to encourage to, break India. And of particular concern is he's named Professor like Ajanta Subramaniam, who is talking about how IITs, now they're after IITs. IITs have always been the bastion for meritocracy, and so now they want to infiltrate IITs and break IITs and say that IITs are a hotbed for caste privilege and upper castes and so on and so forth. So I know you're an alumnus of IIT Kanpur. What would you say to that?
Well, I think there's multiple factors at play. Let's talk about the first one, which is recruiting Indians for this cause. It actually reminds me of what the right did, the Christian right in the US, where I was reading documents in the late 1990s where they had an AD 2000 project. And from there came the Joshua Project, which was about Christianizing India. So this was very much the American Baptists and the American Christians. And what one of the agenda points on their slides, they actually had slides that put up on the internet. The internet was not even that big at that time, but it was very open in 1998. I'm reading these slides, and
On the internet?
they're talking about, pardon me,
On the internet?
on the internet, yeah,
Oh,
because they were communicating with other missionaries, and they didn't have any problem to put these slides up on the internet. So in fact, it was a long time ago. I wish I'd retained copies of those, but it was very interesting. They said just like the goal of Coke is to be in every country, in every place. So they literally used Coke as an example. Like the Christian mission has to operate like Coke, and we have to get into every village and every city, and we have to map all of these. We have to figure out what story will work for that. And one of the things they also said was it's very important to grow local missionaries, because local missionaries are much cheaper to fund, and they understand the culture better, and they're much better at marketing. So what we have to do is we have to grow an entire crop of local missionaries to evangelize Christianity in India, and other areas. So, but India was the big target. And so over the last 20 years, I saw them put their plans into action. So there used to be 20 years ago foreign missionaries coming into India to do this, and now you'll see all of the proselytization is being done by local missionaries. So I think the left has taken the same tactic in a way. It's much easier, and of course the British ruled India the same way. They recruited a bunch of Indian sepoys,
brown
right?
science.
Yeah, brown sepoys who would fire on other Indians, and that's how they could rule India. So the American Academy has done a great job of recruiting Indians that can then be used to attack India and to fire on India. Of course, I wouldn't completely blame the American Academy. I think the problem also is in the Indian Academy, which really created this very left Marxist kind of scholarship that really starts to undermine India from India. For instance, Nepal's very much turn towards China happened after Nepalese leaders who studied in JNU went back to Nepal, and they had been brainwashed to hate Hindu traditions and to look up to communism and to China.
That
So
is very interesting. I had no idea that this is. Oh, so
absolutely,
JNU
absolutely.
is to be blamed for it all.
Yeah, so in the sense that India's far left Marxist, because when we talk about left in India, we're not talking about Bernie Sanders. We're talking about people who are literally waging armed rebellion against the state. We're talking about urban Naxals, Maoists, all these people, and of course we have parties called the Communist Party, which is illegal in the U.S. To In fact, as an immigrant in the US, you have to declare you've never been a member of a communist party. But in India, of course, you have legitimate communist party. So this far left in India cultivated all of this set of people that were very much brought up on colonial scholarship, and also very much a notion of that Hinduism is the disease that the country has to get rid of, and all of these ideas that are calculated. And then when Indian and they were recruited by either Americans or other Indians that were already there in the U.S. Academy. So when went there, and like what's happening in Seattle, for instance, on this caste thing is also a result of that kind. Like Shema or other people are from that same background. They brought their Marxist background from India through their parents or through themselves into the US, and those are the people who are pushing this. Now, for any other country, like the Chinese scholars mostly in the US, or scholars from other countries, from whether it's Turkey or other places, they would be advocating more or less from their point of view, from the point of view of their country or their civilization. But you do almost not find a scholar in South Asian studies or Indology or any of that is saying this is my point of view that is rooted from a Bharatiya standpoint, which is rooted in India, right?
Yes.
Because these people were already kind of indoctrinated into saying that India is an artificial notion and it was created by the British, and we need to have all these sub nationalities that we have to encourage, and India as a notion is oppressive, and all of those stories, right? So those stories come into the US academia, and so then there is an all out. Over the last 20 years, many things happened. Firstly, Indians became very successful, um, more visibly successful. So that was a cause for concern for some people. A lot of this caste stuff is coming as a way to attack Indians because they are being successful, right? And the attack on the IIT is also because they're successful.
Successful.
So the idea is that you want to undermine those things that are a pillar of success for India as India is rising. And the fact of the matter is there's all this push for having professors recruited, based on caste and IITs and all of that. But the question is like, what if we took the absolute thing on that? What if we said only SC/ST professors will teach SC/ST students, right? Only SC/ST doctors will take care of SC/ST patients, right? Will it be acceptable to people if we just did,
Just say that.
did it that way, right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
so if you want to the kind of uh, caste-based policies that these so-called progressives are pushing, right, which says, oh, everything has to be bifurcated by caste, what society would that create, right? Rather than saying, I, as a student from IIT, want to learn from the best possible professor,
True.
right?
Whoever it may be.
Yeah, whatever their background may be. In fact, we should recruit people from abroad to come teach us,
Correct.
if they're really good. This is what China did. China had this 1,000 talents program, which recruited people from all over the world, Chinese nationals, other people, brought them back to China, gave them huge research grants because they wanted to build up the capability of their academia. And they did a marvelous job at it. That is why China has become such a strong academic power. Now, India practically doesn't have a single university in the top 100 in the world, including IITs, right? The first rank starts from 200 something, right? So it's not like we're become, we've actually really conquered that. And we're undermining what we already have
Already.
rather than saying, how do we recruit the best talent from anywhere in the world and stop this stupid division based on caste and all of these categories? So to me, it's a real tragedy that the political dispensation also hasn't taken a clear stand and say, we want to create a society where everybody is being able to rise, and we are bringing the best people in to teach our students so that they're able to conquer the world and to rise. Rather than that, we have these forces that want to undermine by using all these kinds of different tactics to set jatis against each other, to set people against each other, which was the exact same thing that the British had done earlier.
Well, I think it's just going to get more difficult because, like Rajiv ji says, it's no longer about equality anymore. It's not about equal opportunity. What's scary is it's about they demanding equal outcome. So
Right.
it's not like they want equal opportunity and that we're okay with it. They're saying that whatever it is, we need to come out, with an outcome that is convenient for us. And of course, right. You want to say something?
See, first we have to realize that equal outcome is inherently a violent idea. Now, this is a strong statement, and people may not understand what I'm saying. If you look at a forest, okay, you look at a forest, you look at nature. Um, all the trees in the forest are not going to be at the same height. They're not going to be at the same width. They're
Exactly.
not going in a completely natural setting,
Yes.
right? There is going to be inherent difference, right?
Diversity.
So inherent difference and diversity. The creeper is going to have its own role, and the tree is going to have its own role, and every tree is also not going to be the same. Every tree of the same species will also not be the same. They won't all be equal, right? So the only way you achieve equality is you violently erase the forest, you violently plant all the trees to be of the same kind, right? You take out all the biodiversity, and even the same kind of trees will be different. So you chop off their heads so that everybody is the same size. So the equality of outcome can only be achieved through extreme violence, and it is anti-nature. It is anti-natural. So it's an abnormal, anti-natural idea, which in its base comes from anti-natural ideologies that would never work in the real world, right? So all they can create those ideologies is to create violence, and they have been very effective at it. I mean, communism killed 100 million people, and all of these other ideologies, they are essentially violent ideologies. So this caste-based ideology is also a violent
Yeah,
ideology,
yeah.
and and it is already creating violence. It's really looking to create more violence in society.
Right. Shifting gears a little bit, Sankrantji, but relevant nevertheless. But focusing on international issues, the explosion of the Nord Stream pipelines that happened in September of 2022, the pipelines between Russia and Germany. There was an article recently by a journalist called Seymour Hirsch. I think do I get his name right? And I think you've tweeted about it also on your timeline. And he's recently come up with an expose saying that this explosion, it was believed to have been done by pro-Ukrainian agencies, but he says that it's the US that was behind this. So the reason I wanted to bring it up during our conversation is, of course, because you live in the US and you have an inside view of what's happening there. Also, because it's important to talk about these things because the hypocrisy of the West, especially America. I think we need to talk about it because they lecture everybody on human rights and this and that and the other, but always doing things which are very underhanded and detrimental to other people's interests.
Well, the US state, especially in terms of its foreign policy, has always been a very amoral or even immoral state. And this is well known. It's documented by Americans for a long, long period of time. I mean, we know what they did in Chile, where they deposed a democratic prime minister and installed a brutal dictator, in their stead. This is the CIA coup that happened, a few decades ago. And this has, of course, been happening all over South America, Central America,
Middle
other
East.
places in the world. So that part is not new, and it's not even really disputed because there's enough information, documents that are unclassified, and other things that well, nobody can call it just like a conspiracy theory or something. It's very well academically documented. Um, Now, coming to the particular thing, and of course that hasn't changed. People have some impression that this has changed, but America has always used hard power in combination with soft power, and so it has covert and overt operations of hard power, which are very nationalistically safeguarding what it believes is interests, while its academia gives long lectures on how nationalism is terrible
Yes.
for export.
That's for
Right?
countries like India to digest.
Exactly, exactly. So nationalism is terrible, except that the two superpowers of the world, which is the US and China, are hyper nationalistic,
Yes.
right? So let's do what others do rather than do what they say, because what they say is for doing exactly that, which is to actually continue to safeguard their power, as well as at the same time undermine other powers that could be a threat to the nationalism that they're actually safeguarding, right? So all of the rhetoric that comes from the human rights groups, from all these NGOs, from academia, from media, is around using the soft power to firstly camouflage what they are doing with hard power, and secondly to undermine the hard power of others, or undermine the soft power of others. So So with that context, if you look at, what they did in Libya, for instance, WikiLeaks had this email from of Hillary Clinton that was released. She was Secretary of State, and it's very clear that the Libya intervention had nothing to do with Gaddafi's human rights records. Gaddafi's human rights records were the same as what they were 10 or 20 years ago. That hadn't changed. What had changed was that they felt that there is now a threat that Gaddafi might use the gold reserves that they have to launch an African currency. And this was a huge threat to France, where the franc and the French have been their currency is being used in Africa and large parts of Africa, and currency is a huge issue for Western powers. The US has gone to and will go to war to protect the dollar. Even the Gulf War is related to it. If there's any threat that the dollar standard would be moved, or the oil would go off the dollar standard, or it become the international fiat currency, because what happens when the all countries are using the dollar as their reserve currency, it means that the US can basically print wealth, right? The reason why the US has trillions of dollars of debt and can continue is because China is holding $500 billion or some $1 trillion of US currency, which means funding the US's economy. Everybody, because the US has just printed paper and somebody else considers it valuable, right? So, because of its ability to print paper and have other people consider valuable, it's on this drug of having huge deficits, right? And being still not being in default. So this is what is one of the critical things for the US, and it's going to go to war to protect that. So they went to war in Libya. They attacked Libya. They made a huge thing about, human rights, this, that, and the other, which of course Hillary's mail is very clear. It's nothing about that at all. It's about currency, right? And they took out a major African power that had a chance to create Pan-African unity, Pan-African currency, right? While at the same time, all the woke people are like, we are for Black Lives Matter, and all of this, whereas their political entities are completely undermining Black power, right? Completely, completely undermining Africa. So again, there is something that happens for consumption, for propaganda, and there is something that happens in reality. In reality, you attack Black power, you take out Gaddafi, you make sure there is no consolidation, while your own political arm is singing Japa of Black Lives Matter and all of this stuff, So it's very clear they attacked it.
America matter.
No, but even there, it's layers of propaganda. It's layers of propaganda. It's not as if it really matters there also, because when you have to take, like for instance, they're talking about, they're now in the US. They have this big thing about acknowledgement of native rights. This thing was built on native land. So everybody's reading these big acknowledgements. In California, you'll find posters saying, people have these things on their house, outside their house, little stakes in the ground where they're saying this was native property, all of this. अरे भैया नेटिव प्रॉपर्टी अब दे दो वापस
दे दो एग्जैक्टली उनको रिजर्व में बिठा के रखा हुआ है
why are you doing all this lip service, right? If you're serious about the fact this is native, return it to them. Give back Manhattan, move out of there. Right? So do something substantial. But what they're doing is they're doing a hogwash. They're doing lip service. They want to, it's basically continue to fool people while actually making no effect, no effort, no real progress on the ground. Right? So the same with BLM, same with all of these things. But the reality of it is that just like they took out Gaddafi for currency, just like they took out, similarly Saddam Hussein around currency and oil, similarly, the Nord Stream thing is also one of those things. They were always against the Nord Stream, even though it benefits Europe, which is supposed to be their ally. It benefits Germany by getting them lower price gas, right? But because it doesn't fit into their geopolitical strategy, because Russia, can export gas, all of this, it was always on their radar. But there is a public statement of Biden saying that Nord Stream is not going to be a problem for us anymore. This is a year before this attack happened. and there are videos. All of these videos are there, and they're also. I don't think when you say people believed it was pro-Ukraine forces, nobody actually believes it, right? Like everybody knows what has happened, but this fig leaf of even pro-Ukraine forces was revealed after the Seymour Hersh report came out. Then one of the deep state propaganda media outlets, it's called New York Times,
Right.
then released this other propaganda piece with no evidence, with just citing anonymous American intelligence officials that want to do this propaganda, just trying to paper over and saying some pro-Ukrainian forces do it. Fact is, Ukraine has the kind of sophistication that needed to blow up that pipeline, right?
Exactly.
You had to have deep sea divers being able to plant, explore. And this is a lot of concrete. It's not so easy to blow up. And then how do you trigger it? How do you do it?
When
So
Ukraine is always already in the middle of this horrible war,
yeah,
how can you?
exactly. To imagine some random guerrilla forces from Ukraine went and they cared about this pipeline so much that they blew it up. I mean, it's so stupid. Even as a propaganda explanation, it's really dumb,
Yes.
right? But I mean, they had to say something, so that's what they came up with. And of course, New York Times duly published a nice article, cover story on it. So the fact of the matter is that Seymour Hersh is a very, very respected journalist. And even before the article came out, the day after, in fact, somebody, I think it was some politician from Europe, I forget, tweeted like, "Thank you, America," like the very next day that the pipeline blew up. Some European Parliament member or somebody else like that.
Okay.
So like there were so many,
There's
it
evidence.
was so obvious to everybody who's done this.
Correct.
And Seymour Hersh just gave the details of it. He said, okay, it didn't blow up. They actually planted the explosives under this military exercise that they pretended to do earlier. So they planted the explosive that could be triggered by a sonic boom. And then when they blew up the pipeline, they just triggered that sonic boom from the surface that reached that and triggered the explosive that did that. But again, it's like the biggest mafia in town. So the biggest mafia in town makes the rules. So you can't say who's going to bring it to justice to say this is international terrorism.
Europe is like a B team, so it's not going to say anything anyway, right?
Exactly. And same thing, with COVID. More and more we are finding this whole lab leak
Exactly.
was, again, for anybody with a half a brain, it was pretty clear COVID was created. It was pretty clear. The lab leak was the most obvious explanation right from the beginning. Didn't take some genius to figure it out with what was happening. But there was this whole, it's a conspiracy theory, it's discredited. So all the journals, Lancet, all of these medical, huge, sophisticated scientific journals are part of that, because the American virological scientists were implicated in this. They were doing gain of function research, right? And gain of function research was enhancing the capability of the virus. They were developing this in the Wuhan lab, and from there it goes out. And of course, they have to cover all their tracks. So there's all this propaganda, and anybody who speaks about it is labeled a conspiracy theorist. You're shut down. You're deplatformed, taken out from Twitter, taken out from media. Even though they're doctors, they're scientists, they're people with a lot of credentials who are saying this makes no sense. And now in the congressional hearings, we have the former CDC chief saying, Fauci told me to shut up and all of this stuff.
Some guy called Redfield. What's his name?
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so again, it's like these layers of propaganda that are used to keep the interest of the powers that be, and we are kind of Lilliputians in a way, pointing our little guns and saying this is a problem, but this is the way the world has operated for a long time.
Yes.
And so there's nothing new. The only thing is people need to be more aware. And especially in India, it's funny, people really take this rhetoric about human rights and all this stuff as if it has any meaning, coming from all these, organizations.
Oh, yeah.
We should look at human rights are simply weapons of global war. The human rights organizations the human rights have been weaponized. So you create a dossier, on Saddam Hussein, and he's your guy. He was America's favorite dictator, right? But when the time comes to take him out, you pull out this dossier and say, look at all these human rights
Yeah, look,
problems.
he's done. Exactly.
Exactly. Same thing with Gaddafi.
Yes.
He's there for all this time, and but now there's a problem which is nothing to do with his human rights, nothing to do with all of that. But you bring out this, oh, look at all this human rights happening. That's the propaganda. While internally, all the emails are clear what they're actually doing it for.
Taliban, the
Similarly,
same
the
thing.
attacks on India. Similarly, the attacks on India and coming from US academia, all of this. First thing Indians have to realize is this is part of propaganda war. This is part of narrative war. It's part of propaganda war. Just like British India, East India Company had sepoys, the British Empire had sepoys. They have recruited a lot of Indian sepoys for this propaganda war, and they are firing on India and on Indians. And this is not to say there is no caste atrocity or nothing like that happened, or Dalits were never discriminated against. We're not saying any of that. What we're saying is that every society has problems.
Yes.
India will also have some problems, and there are more than a billion people living in India. They're not going to suddenly emigrate to America. It's not going to happen. America is not going to let them in, right? They're going to have to live in India and solve their problems together. When these foreign interventions come, they are not helping India, they're not helping Indian society, they're not helping quote Dalits, they're not helping any of these so-called underprivileged groups. All they're doing is pitting one group against the other to lead to violent clashes that will burn all of India. It's not helping anybody, right? And their agenda is not to help anybody. That's just the rhetoric. So we have to be very clear about that to say, yes, we may have problems to solve. We do have problems to solve, and we are working on those problems in India. A lot of work has been done. Amazing work has been done, and India will continue to work on that. What we don't need is Rahul Gandhi going out and saying, "Oh, we need foreign intervention from Europe," and that this is the exact kind of thing that creates these problems and
Yes.
has created problems for India in the past. And also, we have to take all of what American academia produces with a grain of salt, or what all of what Western academia produces with a grain of salt, what media produces with a grain of salt. They have their own marching orders, they have their own agendas, and we can't take them very seriously.
True. Finally, Sankrantji, it's been a wonderful, it's already been an hour since we've been speaking, but just again, tying into what we've just been talking about, undermining India and Bharat and its traditions, off late since Holi was just a day ago, right? There was this whole controversy. Well, they do this every now and then, right? Every time there's a festival of national importance or a Hindu festival, they come out guns blazing and they'll moralize and preach as about picking on one aspect. So Bharat matrimony, I'm saying this in the context of the recent advertisement put out by Bharat matrimony. Again, very bad taste. um, what would you say to these people? Because and why do they do it every time? Is it because we're soft targets, that, or is it because only we have so many festivals and they can, there's so much that they can nitpick or cherry pick about?
Well, the soft targets, but also it's very strategic. I have to go back more than 1,000 years ago to Thessalonica, which was a place in Greece, where the the bishop was. This is when Greece is being Christianized. This is when the old Olympic Games get banned,
Hmm.
um, and the Olympics games get banned because the Olympic Games were, they had rituals to Zeus and to all these other Greek gods and all these people. So the what they needed to do was they needed to this was a very explicit part of the mission. The church mission was to ban these native festivals and ban all celebrations, festivals, and other things that would lead people to have attachment to those things. You know,
Right.
and so in modern times there was a Project Thessalonica. I've written on it. You can do a search for Project Thessalonica with my name, and you'll find that that was also so you'll find that these festivals are targeted local festival, local games, like the bullock racing, or the jallikattu was targeted in Tamil
Tamil
Nadu,
Nadu.
or bullock cart racing was targeted in Karnataka, all these other places, because a lot of those are related to ritual, they are related to tradition, and also they draw a lot of people,
People.
right? So what you have to do is you have to cut off people's ability to celebrate in that way, and that makes, once they're cut off and unrooted, then it makes it much easier for them to be converted over
Mm.
to something else. So this is why very systematically you'll find Hindu festivals targeted. Oftentimes there'll be some NGO that's going to do it. If you start tracing the NGO, you'll find that they're being funded by a church in Europe, they're funded by some church in the US, all, so there's two or three levels. Sometimes they'll go through some secular
Oh,
sounding
yes, yes.
organization, so there are all these linkages, but when you trace down, it traces down to some of these orgs, and the church funds left wing orgs in the US. This is really ironical because
Mm.
in Europe they are at odds with each other. But
Correct.
what they
But
find is
here,
orgs are very helpful for undermining the native culture and traditions. So they fund a lot of the left wing orgs in India so that they can then attack these traditions and cultures. So, and then I've recently found very shockingly that a number of multinational corporates are also engaged in this,
mm,
where they're using CSR funds to also further the church agenda. So I would say pretty much the when corporates are doing this, it's doing it deliberately, it's part of a strategy, and there are key people one way or the other. Maybe it's not of the corporate change, it might be from the ad agency, it might be from the other people, but
mm,
it's very clearly part of a drive of an agenda to continually attack the Hindu festivals so that they can undermine people's relationship with them,
mm,
so that then when people are unrooted and they're really taken away from all of that, then it becomes much easier to convert. Similarly, for Diwali, for instance, for the firecrackers, incidentally, in the US, they say, okay, you can't do firecrackers except on the 4th of July because it's a major festival. Where
mm.
in India, they say, except for Diwali,
Yes.
which is the festival, you can do firecrackers. Right? You can do it on New Year's Eve, you can do it at Christmas, there's not a problem, no pollution
Somebody's
happens.
wedding. Virat
Yes,
Kohli and
yeah, for
Anushka,
wedding.
yeah, they get
Except
married.
except for the festival where it was very significant for you and part of a tradition, then we're going to ban it. Right?
Mm,
So again, very, very deliberate, through the judiciary, through these other places. And we have to call the BS more and more. This is what's most important, is for people to be aware.
mm,
This is not to say, we can have a debate whether, crackers cause pollution, don't cause pollution, all of that. There's an IIT Delhi study, which says this, pollution by firecrackers is not even a rounding error in pollution in Delhi.
oh,
Most of
yes.
it is, yeah, it's not even it's not, doesn't even show up in the chart. It's due to crop burning mostly, and then vehicle pollution and industrial usage. So those are major causes of pollution in Delhi. But you don't ban crop burning, you
Mhm.
ban firecrackers
Firecrackers.
because that serves the agenda. So what the thing that viewers have to be really aware of is to see the agenda for what it is, be very aware of it, and say, okay, you know what, let us say firecrackers even cause pollution, let's focus on the top 10 activities, we'll get to firecrackers after that. Right? So always don't get conned into, guilt tripped into saying, no, 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 yes, 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 yeah, we have to do it, it's so bad. Right?
Mm,
Look at it systematically. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about pollution in Delhi. What are the major causes? Have you addressed the major causes? Don't go after something which is not really the prime cause here. Right?
yes.
Once we start having those logical debates, you'll find that the agenda becomes more and more visible, because they'll come back to the agenda very quickly, because
Yes.
there's no logic behind the
There is
actions.
no
It's,
logic.
it's
True.
always driven by the agenda.
Very true. Well, Sankranti, I really, really enjoyed talking to you today. It's like I said, it's been an hour already, but I think we've covered a whole range of topics today, and I do hope that people who are watching have taken away something. I'm sure they have from our conversation, and I want to congratulate you on the work that you're doing through your publishing house and your extensive writing. So keep up the good work, Sankranji, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and we need all your support. All this is not. I remember a conversation with Rajiv Malhotra many years ago, where he said we have to create our own institutions.
Yes.
And this became very true when a major publishing house, actually, which is headquarters in England, banned this book called Delhi Riots 2020, right a week before it was
I
published,
remember,
about to publish.
ma'am, the lady, the advocate.
Monica Arora.
Yes, Monica Arora. Yes,
And then Garuda stepped up and we said, we are going to come and publish it. We're not going to let you be deplatformed. So
yes,
GarudaBooks.com, we sold the book directly. Very, very important for people to support these efforts,
very true.
um, support the institution building efforts that are happening in many different organizations, including with Garuda. Buy books, talk about it, tell people about it. We have
Yes.
some wonderful books. In fact, there's a talk at Nehru Center in London.
Mhm.
I think in a week or so,
Okay.
people can go attend, which is about how Hindu mathematics changed the world. The book is
Is it
called
by
The
Professor
Imperishable.
Raju?
This is by Bhaskar Kamble, who's IIT Kanpur, a
Okay.
PhD.
Okay.
And the book is called The Imperishable Seed: How
Mhm.
Hindu Mathematics Changed the World and Why This History Was Erased. Um,
Okay.
such a phenomenal book. He goes through all of the branches we study in mathematics: trigonometry, algebra,
Wow.
origins of calculus. All of this came from India.
Hmm.
Sine was called Jaya. There's a whole way how it got transformed, sine and cos. How they got misinterpreted by Arabs, how it got to Europe, all of that, and nobody's talked about it.
This is. Could you rename? Could you tell us the name of the book again,
Yeah,
Sankranji?
the book is called The Imperishable Seed by
Okay.
Bhaskar Kamble, by
Okay.
Dr. Bhaskar Kamble.
Okay.
How Hindu Mathematics Changed the World is the subtitle, and how its history was erased.
And
Uh,
this is through
Phenomenal book.
Garuda Prakashan.
Yes, by Garuda Prakashan. If you go to garudabooks.com, or you can write to international at garudabooks.com, you can order anywhere in the world.
Right.
Um, and we can send it to you. And there's also a talk by Bhaskar Kamble in the Nehru Center. I believe it's the 17th or 18th or one of those
Okay.
dates.
Okay.
Um,
Yes.
so and again, that book, if anybody reads it, it's very scientifically written, amazing work. It quotes original Sanskrit texts. It's got all of the original sources documented. Like, for instance, when Bhaskar came to me and said, oh, we used to have algebra and we wrote equations, I said, no, don't tell me that, show me the equation. How did we write equations? Produce it there, show me the text, right? So we
Beautiful.
produced all of these things in the text, and we show how algebra as Bijaganit came from India. In fact, it's very interesting. The Arabs actually directly acknowledge it. They say the Kitab of Al Khwarizmi, for
Hmm.
whose name algebra comes, his book itself is called Hisab al Hind. Kitaba Hisab al Hind. He's saying this is, or I'm saying his mathematics of India. But we come up with all these things
Because we've
that
been told that knowledge came to us from the Greeks and then it went to the
yes,
Chinese and the Chinese gave it to the Arabs. That's
right.
that's what we've been told, right?
Yeah, and then Arabs gave it to Europe, and then Europe gave it to us.
Gave
So
it to
finally,
us.
we're civilized. But it's actually quite the other way around. From India, it went to the Arabs, that went to Europe, and from India, it went directly to the Europe as well through the Jesuits who
Hmm.
came to Kerala to learn about how to do a calendar right.
Yes.
And so they learned the calendar and also got all of these Taylor series expansion, so called, and so on and so forth, from
Mhm.
Madhavacharya's work in Kerala School of Mathematics.
And I think a lot of work also went directly from here to China, right, Sankranji? A lot
Yes, yes,
of
yes. A lot of work
the Buddhist
went.
monks would actually come here, sit in Nalanda
Yes,
for years together and diligently copy everything and take it back
absolutely,
with them.
absolutely. So India has truly been the knowledge civilization of the world,
Yes.
and that's why that is mocked, and that's why that's sort of brushed aside. But now we're getting more and more really substantial,
Yes.
significant, documented evidence. Like in this book, The Imperishable Seed.
I'm gonna grab a copy. I'm sure I'm
Yeah,
gonna.
absolutely.
Is it for? I mean, I'm not a student of. I mean, I did math till my 12th, but will a person like me be able to navigate?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's written for a general audience. In fact, one of the other things, I actually edited the book myself. I worked with Bhaskar over 2 years to get it
Lovely.
right.
Okay.
And he was amazing in terms of taking feedback and doing changes and listening.
Mm.
And what I told him was move all the heavy mathematics to the appendix, so
Mm.
that so that people can read it like a story, which it is, and
Yes.
then people who want to dive into the heavier mathematics
We
can
can
also
go
go
back.
into it.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
Lovely. This has been wonderful, Sankranji, and thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. I'm sure there must be people who will go to your site and I'm sure order a copy for themselves. So thank you so much, and we'll have you again very soon, I'm sure. Thank you.
Namaskar. Thank you, sir.
Those who are watching, please, I hope you've subscribed already. If you haven't, you should. Like, share, comment, and spread the word, please. Namaste and Shubhradri.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.